When I was thinking about this week's question that someone wrote to me, I've always wondered how we keep our faith when bad things happen to good people. The first word that came into my head was news. I sometimes think that CNN is a big test to today's person of faith. Let me tell you what I mean. Since CNN first came on the scene, we see tragedies of life in living color and in real time. It's hard to ignore the realities of suffering when it is being beamed into your home 24 hours a day. And CNN has been going for, 30 years, and has affected our perspective of our world. I think one of the first things that I remember when CNN came on the air was the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan. I turned on the TV and there they were, showing footage of people being shot, including the president. And then there was the Space Shuttle Challenger accident. About 30 people in the TV room of the Southampton Tennis Club in Pennsylvania stood silently as we watched the space shuttle explode. And then there was Tiananmen Square in China. I cheered with the protesters, and then I watched in horror as those protesters were attacked and killed. But the phenomenon has continued to go even deeper. There was the whole 9/11 attack almost 9 years ago. But it wasn't just on CNN, it was on every channel. Everywhere the reality of the tragedy was brought home to us. And then there were the tsunamis, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the suffering of the Amish families whose children were senselessly and brutally murdered, the devastation of the Haitian earthquakes, and this last week, the shooting in Manchester, Connecticut. The list goes on and on and on. So, how do we live the Christian life in the midst of this instant, always in your face CNN news age? How do we begin to respond to the needs of the world? So often we feel powerless. We can give money and send flood buckets and we can pray, but the need is so huge and so far away. And at the very same time, we see it all panning out in our homes. How do we continue to believe in the goodness and the righteousness of God when young children are senselessly killed? I guess the easy way to do it is just blame the victims. They must have had it coming. I know I've heard people who said that the tsunamis hit southern Asia because most of the people there were not Christian. Or that the people in the World Trade Center who died must have been sinners. Or that God is punishing New Orleans and Haiti for its sin. But really, that's no answer. Earthquakes and disasters and acts of human cruelty happen in the world. And we can't escape that possibility. That is, unless we want to bury our heads in the sand, theologically speaking. There's really nothing new under the sun. People of faith have faced this question down through the ages, and the Bible addresses it. In Ecclesiastes, the author says, there is a time and a purpose for all things under heaven. God appoints a time to live and a time to die, a time of peace and a time of war. There's a time for sunshine and a time for rain, and by extension, while there is a time for the joys of life, there's also a time for the pains and the pitfalls of that same life. Basically, the passage seems to be saying, life is hard, wear a helmet. But is that supposed to be comforting? No. That's true. Bad things do happen. Hurricanes and acts of violence and other tragedies are part of this world. We wish they didn't exist. But that's not going to make them go away. Ecclesiastes is doing more than just saying that bad things happen. At the same time, it says that all of this deadly weather, these senseless acts of violence, all these things are in God's hands. Somehow, all of this, the good and the bad, are part of a much larger plan by God. And this passage doesn't even try to explain the plan. It simply acknowledges that it's there and that it is all in God's hands somehow. So how do we respond to this disturbing news? Well, I guess there's prayer. And when I'm talking to friends about that, when something bad has happened and I say, well, there's prayer, I invariably will hear at least one or two people say, well, prayer, really? That's it? That's not good enough. Let me ask you something. If a disaster were to happen in this state, a great big disaster, even bigger than the tornadoes that we just had that came blowing through Bridgeport, and Governor Rell didn't call the president or some emergency relief organization, we would all be hopping mad. Well, what if we as Christians didn't call on God? The president can call up FEMA and Congress and the leaders of other countries, but God can call out an army of angels who can do much more than FEMA or the Army Corps of Engineers or the Red Cross all rolled together. Have faith. Somehow, all of this is in God's hands. I don't pretend to understand. In fact, it may be beyond human understanding. I know it's beyond my understanding. But somehow God's got the hurricanes and the earthquakes and the terrorists and shooting victims in His hands. And then we got to do what we can. Sometimes this seems so small and insignificant. We send some money to the United Methodist Committee on Relief or the Red Cross, or like we did a few years back during Katrina, we put together flood buckets. But that just sounds kind of, if you pardon the pun, like a drop in the bucket. I believe that if you truly want to help, God finds a way. I want to close with a story that I heard a couple years ago at annual conference up at Hofstra. And the story was told during one of the sessions from an annual conference speaker. And the story goes that several years ago, the church at which that conference speaker was a pastor, his church had purchased Christmas presents for some needy families. And as he was delivering the presents to one family, the mother said to him that she hoped that someday she would be able to help somebody else out, but that in her current situation, she didn't see how that was ever going to happen. And the speaker told her that if it were her sincere prayer to be able to help someone else, God would make a way. And then he left her to go deliver some other gifts that were in his van. Later that day, he got a call from the mother to whom he'd been speaking. Apparently, he'd accidentally given her a present that was meant for another family. And she said that the tag on the gift had a child's clothing size, and that she had some clothes that one of her children had outgrown that would fit this other child. So she asked him if when he picked up that gift, could he also take these clothes and give them to the other family. He said, absolutely, sure. See? Do you see something? God is already beginning to answer your prayer. And then there was a long silence on the other end of the line, and she said, oh, right. You're right. Truly, there is a time to give and a time to receive. There is a time for storms and a time for clear skies. Somehow it is all beyond our ability to understand, but it is all somehow in God's hands. All we can do is just trust God through the hard times and give thanks. Give thanks for the good times. There is truly a time and a purpose for everything under God's heaven. Amen.